The mailman was just coming up the path with some mail for the Bixbys when their house rushed past him and headed down the street. He chased it for a few blocks, but he couldn't catch it. Now, if you move enough and you're unstable enough, then none of the rest of society can communicate with you or stay in touch with you, and that deprives you of all the benefits that a certain degree of predictability would confer upon you. Like you don't get your mail. Mr. Bixby, he's quite a genius too. When Mr. Bixby came home for lunch, the first thing he noticed was that his house was gone. It's like, sometimes people don't notice things until it's got to that point, right? Because now and then you hear a story about someone coming home and like their wife has packed up and taken the children and that was the end of that. And the person says, well, I never saw that coming. It's like, right. You never saw it coming. And Mr. Bixby, you know, is a conventional sort of guy, a little bit on the clueless side, obviously. He didn't know what the hell was going on. He comes home and his house is gone. And it's a neighbor that has to tell him where it went. It's like, he's just as inattentive as his wife. Mr. Bixby got in his car and went looking for the house. He studied all the houses as he drove along. Finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Mrs. Bixby were waving from an upstairs window. How did this happen, Mr. Bixby asked. That's a good question, right? And that's where the story actually starts to turn around, because somebody finally admits that there's a problem. So they say, well, what's going on? Which is to say, there is a problem, you know, because when you make a statement, the statement has all sorts of inferential meanings that are attached to it. And just to say, well, what's the problem, is also to say, well, that there is a problem, and to say that it's worthwhile formulating the statement that there's a problem, and that it's worthwhile thinking about it. That's a big move. You know, one of the things that Carl Rogers said about therapy, and he's absolutely right about this, is that there are preconditions for therapeutic improvement, and one of them is the person who comes for therapy has to admit that there's a problem before they come, and they have to want to have a solution. And if that situation isn't there, you can't do anything with them. I had people assigned to me at sometimes by the court. It's like court-assigned therapy. That is not useful. Because like the person has to say, well, I'm in trouble, and there could be a solution. And, you know, otherwise they're just sitting there like this, you know, sort of looking at you. Or I had one guy who was a real psychopath. He was a child abuser, and, you know, all he did the whole bloody therapeutic, the whole time I was with him, was brag about what a pillar of community he was, you know. And he was really quite psychopathic, so I tried to at least convince him that, you know, he was likely to continue to get in trouble if he didn't stop what he was doing. But, you know, he was also one of those people who knew absolutely everything, and there was nothing at all that anybody could ever tell him. And, you know, it was just like, it wasn't any more useful than it would have been if I wasn't even in the room. It was completely pointless. So, because he didn't have a problem, everybody else had a problem.